Hello, classroom. How are you? We are reading our book, Heidi, the classic story Heidi. It's down below. And my box of tricks. What? She has a box of tricks? Tricks are for kids. Chapter 20. Distant friends bestir themselves. Distant friends bestir themselves. Let's take a look at it. Not necessarily the title. Well, let's leave the title up there. It was the month of May. The mountain brooks, swollen by melting snow of spring, leaped down from every height to the valley. Bright and warm lay the sunshine on the Alp, which grew greener day by day. The last lingering snowdrift sunk away, and from out the fresh new grass, the little early flowers peeped joyously, opening hourly to the sun's quickening rays. The merry spring breezes rustled through the branches of the old pines, shaking out the last year's rusty needles, so make room for the brighter green of their new array. High above all, the great eagle spread wide his majestic wings against the blue, cloud-flecked sky, and golden sun flames sought out and dried each lingering trace of winter's frost, and spread a warm mantle abroad over the wide elm. Heidi was again on the Alp. She ran hither and thither, I think it's thither, and did not know which spot was the most beautiful. Now she hearkened to the wind, as with deep, mysterious murmurings it came toward her from yonder rocky crag, growing ever nearer, ever stronger, till it seemed to bury itself deep in the pine trees, shaking them and rustling them with a shout so joyous that she joined in with all her force, and was borne this way and that, as if she herself were a spring leaf. Then away to the other side of the hut she flew, flinging herself down on the sun-bathed grass to peer in among the short blades, spying out the timid flower buds and counting how many were already opened at the call of spring. The mazy dances of the flies and midges rejoicing in the spring breeze delighted the child, and she drew in deep inspirations of the scented air as it rose from the fresh, moist earth, and thought the Alp was never yet so beautiful as now. Every tiny living creature she felt must have its sense of perfect happiness as well as she, for they seemed humming and singing one to another. On the Alp, on the Alp, on the Alp, in continuous chorus. From the little workshop in the shed behind the hut came mingling with the rest the busy sound of hammer and of saw, a strain of homely music very dear to Heidi, for it did not belong to the old happy life upon the elm. Yes, from the very beginning. Into the shop she ran with nimble feet, for she must know what her grandfather was working on at so busily. Outside the door stood a new chair, all spick and span, and another, almost completed, was still under the uncle's skillful hands. I know what that means, cried Heidi joyfully. We shall need these when they come from Frankfurt. This one is for Grandmama, and that for Clara. I suppose there will have to be another, the child went on falteringly. Or do you think Grandfather, Miss Rottenmeier, will not come? That I cannot possibly tell, my child. But it will be safer to have a chair ready, so that we can ask her to take a seat if she is here. Heidi stood looking for a long time at the armless, stiff wooden chairs, and making silent mental observations of how Miss Rottenmeier would look if seated upon one. Presently she said slowly, shaking her head, Grandfather, I do not believe she will sit on that. Then we will invite her to be seated on a beautiful turf-covered sofa, replied her grandfather composedly. While the child was puzzling over this answer, the shrill whistle and shout that she knew well came suddenly to her ear. She ran out and was at once surrounded by the bleating flock, which showed plainly that it shared her pleasure at being upon the Alp again. Peter drove them all back, one to the right and one to the left, for he had something to give to Heidi. As he drew near, he handed her a letter. There, he said, leaving to Heidi any further explanation of the matter. Did you find this letter for me up in the pasture, Peter? No, was the answer. Where, then, did you get it? From the lunch bag. The statement was a true one. On the previous evening, the postman had given the letter to Peter to take up to the Alp, and Peter had placed it in the empty satchel. The next morning, the lad put his bread and cheese into the satchel as usual and went up the Alps with his goats. Of course, he had seen the uncle and Heidi on his way up, but not until he had eaten his dinner and was shaking out the last crumbs did the letter again see the light. Heidi read the address carefully, then she ran back to her grandfather in the shop and in high glee held out the letter to him. From Frankfurt, from Clara, she cried. May I read it to you right away, grandfather? The uncle is ready, and so is Peter. The latter disposed himself to listen, uninvited, by placing himself firmly with his back against the doorpost, for thus he could best follow the reading. Dear Heidi, and there's a picture here too. Dear Heidi, we have already packed up everything for the journey, and in 2 or 3 days, we hope to start. Papa is going away too, but not with us. He must go directly to Paris. Every day, Dr. Klassen comes calling out almost before he enters the room. You must go, off to the Alp. He cannot wait patiently until we are ready. I wish you would know how much he enjoyed his visit to the Alp. All through the winter, he has been to see us almost every day. He would sit down by my side day after day and tell me about every day that had passed with you and your grandfather, and about the mountains and the flowers, the quiet that reigned up there so high above all the villages and roads, and the fresh, pure air. And he always said, yes, up there anybody would get well again. He himself is different too from what he was for a long time. He seems quite young and cheerful again. Oh, how happy I am too at the thought of seeing all the things he tells us about, and of being with you on the Alp, and of making the acquaintance of Peter and his goats. But first I must be under treatment for 6 weeks, and Raggetsbad. The doctor has ordered that, and then we shall take rooms in Dorfli, so that in fine weather I can be carried up the Alp to stay all day with you. Okay, so there's our picture. Reading the letter. My grandmama will go with me and stay all the time. She too is very glad to be able to see you again. But just think, Miss Rottenmeier will not go. My grandmama used to say to her almost every day, how is it about the Swiss trip, my good Rottenmeier? Do not hesitate to say so if you wish to go with us. But she always thanked my grandmama in her most terribly polite fashion, and said that she would not be so bold. But I knew what she was thinking about. Sebastian had given a most frightful account of the Alp when he came back from taking you home, how terrible rocks overhung the path, and that everywhere there was danger of falling into chasms or other precipices, while the road went up so steep that it seemed as if one would certainly tumble out backwards, that goats perhaps, but certainly not human beings, could ever climb up there without risking their lives. Miss Rottenmeier shuddered at the description, and has not seemed to care much since the Swiss journey. Tinette too has taken fright and will not go with me. So we shall go all alone, Grandmama and I, though Sebastian will go with us as far as Ratgetz and then return. I can scarcely wait until the time comes to see you. Farewell, dear Heidi. Grandmama sends you 1,000 good wishes. Your true friend, Clara. As soon as Heidi had, think about how exciting that is to get a letter, isn't it? As soon as Heidi had finished reading, Peter darted away from the doorpost, swinging his rod right and left and making it whistle angrily in the air. Away down the mountain scampered the goats, and the herd behind them slashing still at his invisible enemy. This enemy was the expected company from Frankfurt, against whom the lad was very bitter. Heidi, on the other hand, was so full of delighted anticipation that she planned to visit next day to the grandmother to tell her about the latter, who was coming from Frankfurt, and especially who was not. It must all be of the greatest importance, Heidi believed, to the grandmother, who indeed, through her deep affection for Heidi, lived with the child everything that belonged to her life. So she started on the afternoon of the following day, for now she was able to make her visits alone. It was pleasant running down the sunny elm with a frolicsome May wind chasing behind her with many a helping gust. The grandmother no longer kept her bed, but was sitting again in her corner at her spinning. A strange expression, however, lay on her face this afternoon, as if she had heavy thoughts for companions. She had not slept all night because of the anxiety which had come to her the evening before, when Peter came home in his anger. The old woman had half understood from his broken sentences that a crowd of people were coming from Frankfurt to the Elm. What would happen then, he did not know, and she was left to think that out for herself. But now Heidi came bounding in and set herself with such energy to her story that for a while she was more absorbed than ever in the prospect before her. But suddenly she interrupted herself, saying anxiously, What is the matter, grandmother? Are you not pleased with all this too? Yes, yes, child, I am pleased for your sake, that you have something to make you happy, replied the grandmother, trying to look more cheerful as she spoke. But I can see quite well, grandmother, that you are worried about something. Do you really think that Miss Rottenmeier may come after all? Asked Heidi herself with some anxiety. No, it is nothing at all, said the old woman soothingly. Give me your hand a little while, Heidi, so that I can feel that you are really here. It would surely be for your good, though. How I should live through it, I don't see. I will have nothing for my good that you cannot live through, grandmother, said the little girl so decidedly that a new fear arose in the grandmother's mind. She had conceived the idea that the people from Frankfurt were coming to take Heidi back with them, and now the child was strong again. She knew that it would be good for her to go. This was the cause of her grandmother's great anxiety. But now she perceived that she ought not to let this be observed by Heidi, lest the affectionate child might, for her sake, refuse to go away. She cast about for an escape from this dilemma, but only for a moment, for there was but one. Heidi, she said, I know of something that always does me good and makes me contented again. Read me the hymns that begins, God will provide. Heidi began as soon as she could get down the old hymn book and read in clear tone, God will provide on every side that which is best. Should waves o'erroll, they shrinking soul trust him and rest. Yes, that is exactly what I wanted, said the grandmother, with a light heart, and the troubled expression passed from her face. Heidi looked at her thoughtfully and then said, God will provide. We know what that means, don't we, grandmother? Yes, nodded the grandmother. And as we know that he will provide everything just as it should be, we must trust him. Read it once more, Heidi, so that we can have it in mind and not forget it. The child read the words once more and yet once more to the blind grandmother. It was evening when Heidi climbed the mountain. The bright stars came out gradually, one after another, twinkling and sparkling as if they were sending their light down for her special pleasure. And as she gazed at them looking down upon her from the blue heaven, she repeated aloud the grandmother's hymn, God will provide. And all the stars seemed to nod assent, smiling down at her and glowing with the glow in her own heart. Thus she reached the hut where she found her grandfather too gazing upward at the sky, for it was a long time since the starry heaven had shone so brilliantly. Not only the night, but the days too of this month of May were very clear and bright, and the uncle often noticed that the morning sun rose with the same splendor in the cloudless sky as that with which it had set, so that he said repeatedly, "This is the most remarkable month for sun. The pasturage will be very nourishing. Look out, General, that your jumpers and leapers are not too bold with all their good food." And Peter swung his rod round and round after his manner, as if to say, "Never fear, I'll look out for them." And thus the green month of May passed into the warmer June, with its long, long days so full of light, when the flowers on the Alp bloomed forth and everything glowed with many colors, and sweetest perfumes were spread abroad. Toward the end of June, Heidi went forth one day from the hut where she had just finished her tasks of the morning. She wished to see whether the whole great bush of star thistles was indeed open, for the flowers were so exquisitely beautiful with the sun shining through their transparent petals. But as she turned to run back to the hut, an unusual procession to come wending up their quiet elm side. Two men led the way with an open litter in which sat a young girl enveloped in many wraps. A horse followed with a stately lady on his back, a lady who looked about her in a lively manner and chatted briskly with the young guide walking at her side. The bath chair, well known to Heidi, came next, pushing by another lad, and then a porter with such a quantity of rugs, furs, and shawls that his basket was piled far above his head. They are here, cried Heidi, jumping up and down for joy. And there they were indeed. They came nearer and nearer. At last they were at the grass plot in front of the hut. The bearers set Clara's litter on the ground, and the child kissed and hugged to their heart's content. The grandmamma descended from her horse. Heidi ran to her with a tender greeting, and the lady turned to the elm uncle, who drew near to bid her welcome. There was no stiffness in their meeting. They knew each other already, as if they were old friends. After the first words of greeting were over, the grandmamma exclaimed with lively interest, "My dear uncle, what a glorious place you have up here. Who could have believed it? A king might well envy it to you. And how blooming my Heidi looks, like a monthly rose." She drew the child to her, stroking her sun-browned cheeks. "What is that for out-and-out magnificence? What do you say, Clara, my child? What do you say to it?" Clara was looking about her in ecstasy. Anything like it she had never known or imagined. Oh, how beautiful it was. Oh, how beautiful it is, she cried. "I did not suppose it would be like this. Oh, Grandmama, if I could only stay here always." The elm uncle had rolled the bath chair toward her and spread the shawls and soft rugs over it. "It is better for the child to lie in her own chair than in the litter," he said, and without more ado lifted her gently from the straw litter and placed her comfortably in the bath chair, covering her with rugs and tucking them in about her feet as neatly and handily as if his lifelong business had been the care of those disabled in limb. The grandmamma looked on in astonishment. "My dear uncle," she broke out, "if I knew where you learned the care of the sick people, I would send all nurses to learn their business at the same place." The uncle smiled a little bit. "It comes more from practice than from study," he said sadly, in spite of the smile. Before his eyes, out of the long vanished past, rose the figure of a man extended in a chair like Clara's, whose limbs were so stiffened and crippled that he could not move a joint. It was his captain, whom he had found on the battlefield after a fierce fight in Sicily, and whom he had rescued and cared for and tended until death ended his terrible sufferings. The uncle felt that the lame Clara was his special charge, and that he had almost a right to tend and watch her and minister to her comfort as he well knew how. There's the picture there. The sky lay blue and cloudless over the hut and over the pine trees and far away over the high cliffs that rose in shimmering gray against it. Clara could not look about her enough. She was full of ecstasy over everything that she saw. Oh, if I could only run about as you do, Heidi, round the hut and under the pines, she cried longingly. If I could only go to look at everything that I have heard so much about and never seen. Now Heidi made a great and successful effort. The chair rolled quite easily over the short, smooth grass and under the pines. Here they stopped. Never had Clara seen such giant trees as these, whose long, broad branches grew down quite to the ground, each descending branch greater and thicker. The grandmamma, too, who had followed the children, stood filled with admiration. She did not know which was most beautiful, the full murmuring crown high up against the blue sky, or the straight firm column like stems with their powerful branches that told of the many years they had stood looking down into the valley where men came and went and where all was change, while they remained steadfast. Heidi next rolled the chair to the stalks, in which certainly there was not much to be seen, for the animals were away. Clara called back, "Oh, Grandmamma, I long to see Schwan Lee and Barley and all the other goats and Peter. I shall never see them if we have to go down as early as you said we must. It is bad. Dear child, enjoy now the pleasure you are having, and don't think of what may escape you," said the grandmamma, following the chair that Heidi was pushing farther and farther. "Oh, the flowers," cried out Clara again, whole bushes of such pretty red blossoms, and all the nodding bluebells. Oh, if I could get out and pick them." Heidi darted to the flowers and brought back a great bunch of them. "But that is nothing," she said, as she laid the flowers on Clara's lap. "If you go up with us once to the pasture, there you will see something. It is all covered with them. Red star thistle and bluebells and thousands of bright yellow flowers that make the place shine as if it were pure gold. My father says that those are called sun's eyes. And then there are the brown ones with little round heads that smell so good. If you once sit down, you never are willing to get up again. It is so beautiful." Heidi's dark eyes shone with longing to see again what she was describing, while Clara's soft blue ones seemed kindled thereby and beamed in full reflection. "Do you believe that I could get there, Grandmamma?" she said. "Can I ever get up so high? Or if I could only walk, Heidi, and so climb the Alp with you, all over it, everywhere?" "I will push you farther." Heidi thus comforted her, and in her zeal gave the chair such a shove that away it rolled and might have gone down the mountain had not the uncle caught it with his ready hand. While the little party was standing under the pines, the host had not been idle, but had brought out table and chairs for the dinner, set the pot upon the fire, and got everything in process of cooking. Soon it was served, and the company gathered to the repast. The dining room, with its azure ceiling and the view down into the wide stretching valley, were much to the grandmamma's taste. A soft cooling breeze fanned their cheeks as they took their frugal meal and made sweet music for them in the trees. Azure is blue, so they're under the blue skies. "I never yet enjoyed anything so much as this. It is truly glorious. It is a truly glorious scene, declared the grandmamma. But what is this? She continued. Clara, are you really eating a second bit of cheese? In truth, the second piece of golden cheese lay upon Clara's plate, and she bit into it, and the thick slice of bread with real signs of appetite. It tastes better than everything put together and gats, she affirmed. That is right, cried the elm uncle, well satisfied. This is the effect of our mountain air. It always helps. It always helps out where the kitchen is slender. The gay little dinner went on most happily. The two elders understood each other perfectly, and their talk became more and more lively. But after a while, the grandmammas glanced toward the west and said, We must soon be getting ready to go down, Clara. The sun is sinking, and the people will be here with the horse and litter. At those words, Clara's happy face became clouded. Only 1 hour more, dear grandmamma? 1 hour or two? We have not been into the hut at all, nor seen Heidi's bed. Oh, if only the day was 10 hours longer. Which is not quite possible, you know, said the grandmamma, but she really wished to see the hut herself. So they rose from the table, and the elm uncle rolled the chair from firm hand toward the door. It was far too wide for the narrow opening, but the uncle did not long bethink himself. He lifted Clara out and carried her into the hut straight away in his strong arms. Once within, the grandmamma ran about, peeping into every corner, making merry in her lively way over the housekeeping, which she was obliged to say was very neat and well ordered. Your bed must be up here, Heidi, she asked, and with nimble feet climbed the little ladder to the hayloft. How sweet it smells up here. It must be a very healthful bedroom. She went to the opening to look through while the uncle came up with Clara on her arm and Heidi trotted along behind. Then they all stood admiringly about Heidi's nice-made bed, and the grandmamma pensively inhaled deep breaths of sweet-scented air. Clara was quite carried away by the charms of Heidi's bedroom. How nice it is for you here, Heidi, she exclaimed. From your bed you can look right into the sky, while with the hay smelling so sweet all about, and the sound of the wind in the pines. I never heard of so jolly and perfect a bedroom. The uncle looked significantly at the grandmamma. It seems to me, he said, if the grandmamma is not opposed to it and will trust me, that the little girl might be left here for a while, and that she would gain strength. So many shawls and rugs of all sorts came with her that we can arrange a quite comfortable bed, and the grandmamma need have no anxiety as to the care that will be taken of her. I promise that. The two children screamed for joy like two suddenly freed birds, while the grandmamma's face was radiant with satisfaction. My dear uncle, you are a charming man, she said with animation. What do you suppose I was thinking of? I have been saying to myself all this time, would it not be a good thing for Clara to remain up here for a while? Would it not strengthen her? But then the care for the host and the nursing and tending, and here you propose it as if it were nothing at all. I must thank you, my dear uncle. I must thank you from my heart. And the grandmamma shook her host's hand once again and yet again, and the uncle shook hers in return, his face beaming. The uncle went to work at once. He carried Clara back to her chair before the hut, followed by Heidi, who could not jump up high enough. She was so happy. Then he took all the shawls and rugs on his arms, saying, while he could not help laughing, it is very fortunate that the lady grandmamma fitted herself out as if she were going on a winter campaign. We can put them all to good use. My dear uncle, replied the visitor gaily, prudence is a fine virtue and wards off many a calamity. If a body gets back from a journey over your Alp without having encountered storms and wind and rain spouts, he may be grateful, and so will be, and my coverings are good for something. About that we are united. While this little conversation was going on, they had both climbed up to the hayloft and begun to spread the wraps over the bed, one after the other. There were so many that it looked at last like a little fortress. Now let me see a stalk of hay stick through if it can, said the grandmamma as she passed her hand over the bed on every side. But the soft wall was so impenetrable that truly not one came through. She went down now to the children, who were sitting with beaming countenances, making plans of what they would do from morning to evening, all the time they were to be together. But how long would that be? This was the question that was instantly laid before the grandmamma. She said that the grandfather knew best about that. They must ask him. As she presently appeared, they did not ask him, and he replied that 4 weeks would be enough to enable them to judge if the heir of the elf performed its duty in strengthening Clara or not. Now the children rejoiced with a will, for the prospect of remaining together so long surpassed all their expectations. At last the litter bearer and the horse with its leader were visible as they came toiling up the winding mountain path. The former was allowed to turn back immediately. While the grandmamma was preparing to mount her horse, Clara said gravely, "Oh, grandmamma, this is not at all a parting, even though you are going away. You will come every now and then to visit us on the Elf, to see what we are about, and that will be so jolly, won't it, Heidi?" Heidi, who today had fallen from one pleasure into another, could signify her assent only by renewed jumping up and down. The uncle descended the mountain with his guest. Although she begged him not to take so much trouble, he insisted upon holding her bridle rein, declaring that he should give her his goats. As soon as these decried Heidi, they ran toward her as usual. In a moment, Clara, in her chair, as well as Heidi, was surrounded by the flock, which crowded and pushed and peeped one goat over the other. They were quickly named by Heidi, and one and all presented to Clara. So it came about that the latter quickly learned to know the pretty Snowball, the lovely Thistlebird, the grandfather's well-kept goats, and even the big Turk. Peter, meanwhile, stood apart, casting strangely threatening glances toward the happy girl. When the children had last... Here's the picture. When the children at last looked kindly toward him, calling, "Good evening, Peter," he made no answer, but slashed at the air with his rod as if he would cut it all in bits. Then off he ran, and his followers at his heels. But of all the beautiful things that Clara had that day seen on the Alp, there came now the best. As she lay in the big, soft bed in the hayloft to which Heidi had also clambered, and looked through the round opening up into the starry heavens, then she cried out, delighted beyond measure, "Oh, Heidi, look! It is exactly as if we were driving in a high open carriage right through the sky." "Yes, and do you know why the stars are so happy and twinkle their eyes so?" asked Heidi. "No, I do not know why." "What do you mean, Heidi?" "Because they see up there in heaven how the good God provides everything good for his children, so that they need have no anxiety and may be quite sure that everything that happens will be for the best. That makes them happy." So how they twinkle, they want us to be happy too. But you know, Clara, we must not forget to pray to the good God and beg him to remember us when he provides for his children, so that we can be quite sure and need not fear anything. Now the children sat up in bed and said each her evening prayer. Heidi immediately put one round arm under her head, and in a trice was asleep. Clara, however, lay awake for a long time, for such a bright star-lighted sleeping room she had never seen in her life. In fact, she had scarcely seen the stars at all. She never went out of the house in the evening, and the thick curtains within were always closed long before the stars came out. So now, when she shut her eyes, she had to open them again at once to see if really those two wonderfully bright ones were still sparkling and twinkling as Heidi said they did. And they were always there, but Clara could not look long enough at their gleaming light until her eyes closed of their own accord, and in her dreams even she saw yet the two great shimmering stars. That was a long chapter. Okay, we will be moving to chapter 21, more about the life on the Alp. So we are coming to a close in our classic story, Heidi, by Johanna Spyri. Thanks for joining me in the reading room. Oh, by the way, I have moved Heidi all to a playlist, so you can go through that playlist, and it's all, if you check out and look at my playlist, there's a whole playlist there for Heidi. So it'll start you there with chapter 1. Thanks for joining me here in the reading room with the teacher. That's all.